A social media user is trolling a major defense contractor with advice that is normally reserved for the poor. And the result is awesome. Now, in the wake of the current economic crisis, corporate America has once again turned to socialism to help bail them out. That's just like what happened in 2007, 2008 during that fiscal crisis, where the banks crashed the economy and got bailed out. Now, here we have a different situation, but we've got the same kind of corporations that are coming to the government, to the taxpayer with hat in hand to beg for a bailout. And now the situation that's happened, I've explained this before, and I will again, is that even before this crisis, you had an issue with companies that were over leveraged. Now, what I mean over leveraged, they borrowed more than they can pay back. And so that's what that means. Now, corporations, you might be wondering, like, wait a minute, I thought we had the best economy ever. That's what Donald Trump says. Why would these corporations have to go and borrow all this money? Especially when we gave them $1.9 trillion in tax cuts. Well, it's so that they could go and buy back their own stock. Not only that, but you had very cheap interest or very low interest rates and cheap loans. And so they could go and borrow and borrow and borrow. And that's exactly what they did. And they used that to enrich their shareholders and their executives. And that's exactly what, by the way, Boeing had done. And so now, with an unexpected issue that is making the economy fall apart, well, these same corporations are now saying, oh my God, we're not going to be able to have enough to pay back those loans. What are we going to do? Government. And by the way, one of the reasons that these companies like Boeing are not getting a lot of business is because, well, look, Boeing supplies not only defense contractor stuff, and we're still, sure, we're still bombing people. And, that I guess never goes out of style for the United States, but they also supply jets, aircraft for airports, for airline companies. Well, nobody's flying right now. Nobody can fly. In fact, you have travel restrictions all over the country, travel restrictions all over the world. You have people being asked to sit in their homes, to self-quarantine, practice social distancing, all that stuff. And so nobody's traveling. And so they're not getting this money, and they're not getting this business. And so, again, these over-leveraged loans have put them in a real financial crisis. Okay. And so now these companies beg the taxpayer and to bail them out. And unfortunately, Congress is more than happy to use taxpayer money to do so. In fact, the stimulus bill passed by the Senate has gigantic bailouts for the airline industry and all these giant corporations. And so they're likely going to get that money. But see, here's the thing, right? So now, look, even when the economy was supposedly strong, you had a lot of people that were struggling to survive. And there was a lot of bad advice from, look, you got columnists, people writing for the Wall Street Journal, conservative thinkers, even neoliberal thinkers that were writing these pieces about why don't these poor people, why don't they just lift themselves up by their bootstraps, man? Why do they got to be a drag on the taxpayer and take bailout? Why should we have to bail them out when they can just go get a job, right? So now, Twitter user Kazayel decided to point out how unfair and reasonable it is to use those talking points against people that are struggling, right? And she used the same arguments people use against the poor against multi-billion-dollar corporations who happen to be struggling. So let's get to that. Now, she starts off by saying, why doesn't Boeing have money saved up for emergencies? If they're poor, how come they have an iPhone and a TV? Maybe they should get another job and work harder. Drive for Uber on the side. Stop wasting money on DoorDash. Not our fault they chose a major that doesn't pay well. Again, you got to love this because it is fun. Boeing has the same 24 hours that the rest of us do. They can use that time to be lazy and complain about their situation, or they can use that time to hustle and grind and build something for themselves. No excuse. They can start a business, learn to invest, flip houses. Look, if you're thinking that this sounds super absurd because we're talking about a multi-billion dollar corporation, remember there are people out there that believe corporations are people, for one. And two, it is supposed to sound ridiculous because that's exactly the same ridiculous arguments they use against people who have lost jobs for, through no fault of their own, who can't go and pick up a skill and flip houses, which, by the way, it's insane because you actually have to go and borrow money to buy a house and get into real estate if you're going to even flip it. And then you have to have a strong real estate market, et cetera, et cetera. It's absolutely ridiculous, right? These suggestions. But nonetheless, this is what they tell poor people. Now, some more in that thread. She said if Boeing really wanted to, they could work, go to school, start a business, and take care of their kids at the same time. Boeing doesn't sleep. That's just another excuse. If you really want something, you make it happen no matter what. Tired of lazy, ungrateful welfare companies like Boeing living off the rest of us. Get a effing job. Stop depending on ordinary, hardworking Americans to bail you out all the time. This is the land of opportunity. If you work really hard, you can accomplish anything. And then also, if you're a struggling company like Boeing and this thread inspired you, I help multi-billion dollar companies achieve financial freedom by teaching them to start side hustles, invest in cryptocurrencies, and flip houses. Sign up on my website for more info. So look, again, that's a lot of fun, right? And a couple people got in on that fun. In fact, one social media user said, they need to stop buying lattes and eating avocado toast. Another, Boeing just has a starter job. They should move to another city if they can't pay the rent. More, they should start living within their means. Maybe they need to move back in with their parents. Another user says, they should have a 6-month emergency fund. Should have saved their tax cut. Now, that's actually a really good point and a serious point. Why don't these corporations have all this money saved up? They're supposed to be sitting on trillions of dollars of cash, right? From the tax cuts. Oh, but what did they do instead? Well, they went and bought back their own stock. They artificially inflated their shares by buying back their own stock and then use that money to give their executives gigantic bonuses. They didn't give it to the workers. They didn't give it to regular people, right? They certainly didn't put it into savings for the customer. No, are you kidding me? You ever flew before? Fees on top of fees. That's a baggage fee. You've got, all these different additional fees every time. I've flown like once before, so there's all these additional fees that get added in if you want to get extra things. Wi-Fi fee, extra fee. You want more legroom? Yeah, that's gonna cost you, man. All the ways that they nickel and dime you when you're trying to fly, and yet, they got all this money, they got all these tax cuts, and they're getting all these giant bailouts. It's ridiculous. Why don't they have it? Why don't they have any emergency money? Yeah. Now, one more here, and this is just fun. Learn to code, Boeing. Wasn't that Joe Biden telling people to learn to code? Yeah. So look, these are great because poor people hear this all the time, right? And they're just trying to do what they can to survive. Whereas Boeing's a big corporation and they go a begging. And whenever that happens, nobody tells them to F off. Certainly not the government, right? No, they get called essential for businesses. They get called essential for jobs, despite them constantly screwing over their employees. And then again, being incredibly irresponsible with their money. And none of these companies asking for a bailout saved up money for an emergency, right? They don't have a rainy day fund, but you and I, regular people, we're expected to have that. We're expected to have several months of savings in a country where wages are so low that 40% of Americans cannot afford a $400 emergency. Yeah, yeah. Or 60% of people can't afford $1,000 emergency, where 2/3 of millennials can't are never going to retire. We don't have retirement funds. And by the way, if you have a retirement fund that's invested in the stock market, if you had a 401k, you ain't got a 401k anymore because your retirement just evaporated. And so, look, the economy is a wreck, but it's always been a wreck for poor people who have never been able to afford to stand on their own in an economy where wages have stagnated for the last 3 to 4 decades, while productivity has soared. The minimum wage should be over $25 an hour at this point in order to keep up with inflation and the cost of living. And so I just find it ironic that people continue to use those arguments. Well, maybe not anymore, because a lot of people have lost their jobs or are going to lose their jobs because of this current crisis, all while Boeing gets a giant bailout. I think Boeing shouldn't be getting a dime. Unless, there would be one stipulation, by the way. I would actually bail out Boeing if and only if the people get a stake in ownership of the company. Yeah, nationalize it. Exactly. If they can't be responsible with their money, after all, well, then maybe the people might do a better job. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.